I was born beneath a sky I have never seen. Down here, the world is made of rusted pipes and screaming vents, of dripping coolant and the metallic taste of recycled air that smells like old blood. People say there is a sun somewhere far above the smog, high past the manufactura towers and the corpse-choked exhaust stacks, but to us it may as well be a myth like mercy or justice. Childhood in the underhive isn't measured in years, it's measured in how long you live before radiation sickness, starvation, or the syndicates carve you open for spare organ trade. We don't learn to speak, we learn to run. We don't learn to dream, we learn to hide from the Arbeits patrols and the gangs who use children as bait. And yet even here, buried beneath endless metal, the Imperium demands faith, even from those it forgets exist. If you can stomach the truth buried beneath Imperial propaganda, stay with me. Share this story so others know the price of survival, and subscribe so you don't lose your way in the dark. I don't remember being born, only waking up to the sound of metal groaning above me, like some ancient beast shifting in its sleep. My first memory is darkness, not the peaceful kind, but the thick, industrial blackness of a world where light costs more than food, where lumen strips flicker only when the power grid remembers the lower hab blocks exist. The walls around me were made of dented sheet metal, layered with rust and sewage stains older than anyone alive. My crib was a scrapyard cart, lined with old rags that smelled faintly of promethium and blood. My mother was already coughing herself toward death by then, lungs coated in industrial dust that drifted like poison pollen through the air. She sang to me in a voice that cracked on every note, a lullaby stolen from a world she barely remembered, something about sky and wind and open fields, concepts that meant nothing down here. We lived beneath a collapsed segment of ventilation infrastructure deep in underhive block R988, a region so forgotten that even the cartographers of the administratum marked it simply as unproductive mass. The higher levels of the hive liked to pretend we didn't exist. They needed us for labor, biomass, organs, and occasional purges of population to balance oxygen demands. But they couldn't afford to acknowledge that human life festers where the light does not reach. If they did, they might be forced to remember that the Imperium spans trillions of souls, most of whom never see a sunrise or a star, or even the sky itself. Down here, children were not born, they were acquired by the hive. Some died before growing teeth, their bodies tossed into waste chutes where corpse grinders processed them into nutrient slurry for livestock. Others survived long enough to walk, only to disappear into ducts or vanish during night raids when the syndicates needed spare organs to trade with rogue tech priests. A few made it to adolescence, but childhood was never something you experienced. It was something you survived long enough to abandon. My mother died when I was 5, though I did not understand death then. She lay still beside me, hands slipping from mine, blood bubbling from her lips as her lungs collapsed beneath years of metal dust. I shook her gently, then harder, then screamed until my throat tore. No one came. Screaming meant weakness. Weakness meant predators. 3 days later, when her body had begun to stiffen, I dragged her to the corpse chute myself. I wasn't strong enough to lift her fully, so I pushed inch by inch, feet slipping on slick metal. When gravity finally took hold, her body disappeared without ceremony. A clang echoed below, followed by the mechanical grinding of the reclamation augers. I sat beside the chute for hours, listening, convincing myself she was just sleeping in a deeper place. I learned much later that the slurry made from those chutes fed Grok's farms in the mid-hive. Perhaps, in some way, she nourished others more in death than she ever could in life. After that, survival became routine. I scavenged scrap from wrecked servo workshops, shards of adamantine plating, stripped wiring, spent last cells I could trade to the older children who ran markets beneath collapsed transport rail lines. They called themselves elders, but none were past 14. They ruled with knives and hunger, offering safety in exchange for loyalty. Refusing them meant sheltering alone in cracked ducts where radiation leaks cooked bone marrow slowly. One night, during a trade, a boy with a scar shaped like a lightning bolt across his jaw shoved me against a wall, knife pressed beneath my chin. He demanded I swear loyalty to his gang. I spit rust and blood in his face. He punched me hard enough to crack 2 teeth. I staggered, stumbled, swung back, not because I thought I could win, but because defeat meant recruitment or death. Before he could stab me, a pipe collapsed overhead, showering sparks and debris. The boy fled. I ran the other direction and never traded in that market again. Violence was not event, but environment. People told stories of the levels above us. Tales passed down from migrants who had once climbed toward hope and returned with broken limbs and missing eyes. They spoke of manufacturum districts where machines stamped armor plates day and night, endless rows of sparks falling like metal rain. They spoke of noble spires where air was filtered and perfumed, where the wealthy walked beneath artificial skies projected by holo-emitters. They spoke of ecclesiastical chapels large enough to house entire villages, where priests recited scripture through vox grills gilded with icons of terror. To us, these places seemed fictional, like legends told before sleep to distract from the sound of pipes bursting overhead. I didn't believe any of it then. I didn't believe in anything beyond the next piece of scrap, the next meal, the next night spent alive. My understanding of faith arrived unexpectedly. It happened during one of the purification cycles when the hive vents belched, scalding steam through exhaust grates to flush out toxic buildup. Entire corridors became death traps. Those who failed to reach shelter suffocated or boiled alive. I was running from one such vent burst when a robed figure seized my arm and dragged me beneath the shelter of a broken bulkhead. He covered my mouth to stifle screams as white-hot vapor roared past, melting the skin of a man who had been a heartbeat too slow. When the vents quieted, the figure released me. He was an elderly preacher, robes tattered, rosarius cracked, imperial aquila stitched across his chest in threadbare gold. His eyes were milky with cataracts, but he spoke with clarity. "You are blessed," he rasped. "The Emperor sheltered you." I stared at the melted corpse nearby, skin peeling from bone like wax. He didn't shelter him. The preacher's smile was sad. Faith is not protection from death. It is purpose in dying. I turned to leave, but he held my wrist gently. "Do you have a name, child?" "No," I said. "Names get people killed." He nodded slowly. "Then let him name you." Before I could pull away, he traced the aquila across my forehead with 2 fingers. The gesture burned not physically, but in a way that carved itself into memory. "You are his child," he said. "Even here." I ran, without looking back. The next night, a woman selling fungus paste asked what the mark on my forehead meant. I wiped it away angrily and told her it meant nothing. She only nodded, pity in her eyes, a dangerous emotion in the underhive. A week later, I returned to the preacher's shelter. I found him dead, not murdered, not starved, simply crumpled beneath his shrine, wrapped in his own robes like burial cloth. His body was untouched. The gangs respected priests not from reverence, but because killing holy men drew Arbite's raids. I stared at his corpse, waiting to feel something: pity, anger, gratitude. Instead, I felt nothing but a hollow ache that sat beneath my ribs like forgotten hunger. I considered dragging him to the corpse chute. Instead, I covered him with scrap metal and welded the entrance shut, a tomb of rust and forgotten faith. For weeks after, I dreamed not of him, but of the melted man burned alive in steam. The preacher's words echoed through the dreams, shifting meaning. Faith is not protection from death, it is permission to endure it. Life continued. Scavenging routes grew more dangerous. Children vanished more frequently. A gang called the Vox Rats began kidnapping anyone small enough to fit into collapsed tunnels lined with unstable promethium tanks. They forced children to crawl through the ducts and activate manual release valves to prevent catastrophic explosions. Most didn't return. Those who did emerged coughing blood, lungs shredded by chemical residue. The gang leaders said they died serving the hive. They lied. They died to ensure the gangs profited off fuel quotas. One night, the Vox Rats caught me. They dragged me toward a duct, shoved a corrosion-scarred rebreather onto my face, and ordered me inside. I refused. The leader punched me in the stomach and shoved harder. When I resisted again, he removed the rebreather and tossed it aside. "Fine," he said, "go in without it." He reached for a welding torch to scare me into submission. Before he could activate it, a pipe overhead ruptured. Boiling coolant rained down. The leader slipped, screaming as his skin dissolved. The others fled. I ran. I don't know if it was coincidence or divine intervention. I only know the preacher would have called it purpose. After that night, survival meant isolation. I avoided camps, markets, scavenger gangs, anything resembling community. People meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant death. My world shrank to narrow tunnels and unused vents. I learned to crawl silently, to sleep, in ducts above active power conduits where no adult could fit, to subsist on condensation and lichen scraped from pipes. I became a shadow of metal, a creature of function rather than being. But even shadows have limits. One evening, I crawled from a duct to find a group of children gathered around a broken Vox unit. Static crackled from its battered speaker. They stared as though witnessing a miracle. I joined them silently, sitting at the edge of the group. The signal shifted. Then a voice emerged, faint, metallic, distant. Stand firm. Service to his light. For terror. For mankind. It was a sermon broadcast from upper Hive levels, a recording intended for workers in manufactorum districts. The children listened wide-eyed, their imaginations stretching towards skies they had never seen. One whispered, "He knows we exist." Another whispered back, "No, he speaks to them." I realized then that faith, even misapplied, offered something survival could not. Identity. The broadcast ended. The light on the Vox unit died. The children dispersed quietly, returning to whatever holes they called home. I sat there a long time, staring at the dead machine, not believing, not rejecting, just wondering what it felt like to matter. Months passed. I grew taller, stronger, faster. My bones hardened from constant malnutrition. Scars layered across skin like topographic maps of survival. Childhood faded, though I had never truly possessed it. The hive shifted with me. Vents collapsed. Corridors flooded with toxic runoff. Arbeits patrols hunted heretic cells in raids that left dozens dead. I watched armored judges drag screaming mutants through corridors, boots splashing through slurry mixed with blood and oil. One woman begged for mercy, claiming her deformity came from radiation exposure, not taint. The Arbeits shot her in the face and tagged her body for disposal. For the first time, I felt anger strong enough to choke. Not at the Arbeits, at the galaxy that made her corpse inevitable. Later, when the fumes cleared and the bodies were removed, I stood where she had died. I pressed 2 fingers to the stain left behind and traced the aquila across my chest. Not prayer, recognition. The hive doesn't raise children, it shapes them into tools, and tools only matter when someone chooses how to wield them. I did not know then where my life would lead, or what purpose the Emperor or the hive itself would carve into me. I only knew this. I was alive. I was still standing. And in a world built to use me up and discard me, that alone felt like rebellion. Hunger is not a sensation in the underhive, it is the atmosphere. It seeps into the lungs with every breath, clings to skin like soot, turns thought sluggish and animalistic. It strips away memory until the only truth left is need. There were days I could not distinguish the ache in my stomach from the ache in my bones. The fungus paste that passed for food tasted like damp metal and mold, and most batches carried spores that rotted teeth from the inside. Clean water existed only in legends told by elders who remembered living closer to the surface. Down here, water came from condensation scraped off pipes or runoff filtered through cloth wrung from rags. The lucky drank machine coolant diluted with melted ice. The desperate drank blood. It was during this era of gnawing starvation that I met the children who would become my first pack, not friends, not siblings, but survival partners, bound by circumstance rather than trust. They called themselves the Skinners. We scavenged together, because doing so alone meant death. Their leader, a wiry boy named Jex, wore a coat of patchwork hides stripped from dead sump beasts. He was missing 3 fingers on his right hand, replaced by rusted servo hooks that clicked quietly when he clenched his fist. Those hooks weren't weapons, they were trophies from a tech priest who had tried to vivisect him for augment potential. We found each other while tearing apart a derelict transit car whose interior had fused to its rails after decades of neglect. Jex offered to split the scrap with me in exchange for territory rights. I accepted because refusing meant having my throat cut the moment I turned my back. In time, I learned Jex wasn't cruel out of joy. He was cruel because cruelty was more reliable than language. Our scavenging routes took us deeper into forbidden sectors, tunnels where warning runes flickered like broken constellations. Some paths were clogged with corpses still fused into wall supports, skin stretched, like parchment where bioacid leaks had turned human bodies into structural filler. Other tunnels were inhabited by feral children who had been abandoned so young that language had never formed in their minds. They hissed like animals and moved on all fours, eyes reflecting red in lumen shadows. The gangs ruled these corridors. Each gang had a territory, a dogma, a method of killing. The Iron Fangs filed their teeth into razors and drenched themselves in stolen promethium before charging enemy lines. The spine cutters removed the spines of their defeated foes to sell to cybernetic harvesters. The Vox Rats worshipped malfunctioning servitors whose neural cores flickered with corrupted imperial hymns. These servitors walked in circles, command protocols looping broken prayers like dying litanies. Children dragged beneath their hydraulic limbs were crushed into offerings. The gangs believed that if they sacrificed enough, the machine spirits would awaken and lead them to a better level of the Hive. Hope is a weapon in places that have none. One night, the Skinners and I scavenged in a collapsed magrail station when we heard voices echoing through broken loudspeakers. Not words, chants. Dozens of voices chanting in synchronization, footsteps pounding in ritual cadence. Jex froze, eyes narrowing. Shardbacks, he whispered. The Shardbacks were older, stronger, their armor made from jagged plates of tempered scrap bolted into bone. They coated their bodies in shard glass and broken porcelain so that touching them drew blood. They never walked alone. They hunted in packs, flaying victims alive to decorate their armor with skin that dried into brittle banners. Their initiation required a first kill by hand, not weapon, ensuring they felt bone crack and warmth leave the body. We tried to hide among rusted train seats, but the Shardbacks found us by scent. They dragged us into the station's main concourse, where their leader, a massive man with pipes welded into his spine like metallic thorns, stood upon a mound of skulls. He stared down at us with pale, lidless eyes. "New blood," he growled. "Fresh stock. Working hands or offerings?" He approached me first. I stood rigid, refusing to flinch, knowing fear marked prey. His hand reached toward my face, fingers tipped with broken ceramic shards. If he touched me, my blood would mark the ground, and once marked, escape was impossible. Jex intervened. He stepped forward, arms spread in a gesture of subservience. "We bring tribute," he said, voice steady though his body trembled. "Spare us, and we'll bring more." The Shardback leader tilted his head. "Tribute?" Jex nodded toward a rusted hatch. Beneath it, he had hidden a stash of high-grade wiring valuable enough to trade to tech priests for augmetics. The Shardbacks shoved me aside and tore open the hatch. When they saw what Jex had gathered, their leader let out a rasping laugh. "You want mercy," he said. "Mercy costs flesh." Before I could react, he grabbed one of the younger Skinners, a small boy named Rill, whose arms were thin as cables, and slammed him against the wall. The boy squealed. The Shardback leader raised a serrated knife. Jex screamed, "Take me instead." But the blade plunged, not into the boy, into the leader's throat. I had moved without thinking. The shard knife clattered to the ground as blood sprayed across my face, warm and metallic. The leader staggered, eyes wide with shock. I pulled the blade free, twisted, and thrust it upward into his jaw, silencing his death gurgle. His enormous body toppled, and the impact shook dust from the ceiling. For a moment, the station fell silent. Then the Shardbacks roared. I didn't wait. I grabbed Rill and bolted through a shattered transit doorway. Jex and the others followed, feet pounding metal, breath ragged. The Shardbacks pursued, howling like beasts, their armor clattering with the sound of breaking bone. We sprinted through, rail tunnels half flooded with stagnant water. Pipes burst overhead, spraying coolant. Rill slipped. Jex hauled him up. I pushed forward, lungs burning. We reached a maintenance shaft too narrow for adults. We squeezed inside, metal scraping flesh. The Shardbacks slammed against the entrance, screeching threats. Their fists hammered steel until dents formed inches from our faces. Eventually, their rage turned to retreating footsteps, then silence. Inside the shaft, we lay panting, bodies pressed together in a space barely wide enough to breathe. Rill sobbed. Jex stared at me, expression unreadable. "You killed him," he said softly. I wiped blood from my cheek. It smeared, sticky and dark. "He would have killed us." "That's not what I mean," Jex whispered. "You killed him without hesitating." There was no accusation, only realization. That night marked a shift. Jex no longer looked at me as another scavenger. He watched me like someone studying a blade useful, dangerous, necessary. The others gave me space around fires, not out of fear, but reverence. It wasn't long before word spread. Children whispered tales of the one who slew a shardback alone. Exaggerations formed legends, and legends drew attention. Attention attracts predators faster than weakness. A month later, the syndicate came. They arrived silently, hooded figures with visors tinted crimson, weapons holstered but visible enough to remind us that survival depended on obedience. They ruled the mid-tier gangs and taxed their spoils. No child refused them. No adult survived long enough to try. Their leader, a woman known only as Thane, stepped into our camp. Her armor gleamed not with scrap metal, but polished ceramic plates adorned with sigils too precise to be carved by hand. She studied us with clinical interest. "Which of you killed the shardback packmaster?" she asked. None answered. Her mask tilted toward me. "You." It wasn't a question. She tossed a ration tin at my feet. Real food protein paste, concentrated nutrients, stamped with the seal of a noble house. My body lurched with hunger, but I didn't move. Accepting food meant accepting ownership. She nodded approvingly. "Restraint. Good." Then her tone hardened. "You belong to me now." Jex stepped in front of me before I could speak. "They belong to no one." Thane drew her pistol, a sleek las pistol far too refined for the underhive, and shot him through the calf. He collapsed, screaming, blood pooling beneath his leg. She didn't raise her voice. "That one lives because he speaks with loyalty. Loyalty is leverage. Use it well." She faced me again. "If you want to keep him alive, you will bring me children from the lower ducts. Healthy ones, silent ones. We trade them to the manufactoria. They become workers, servants, components." She meant servitors. I said nothing. She leaned in, visor inches from my face. "Refuse, and I'll take you instead." Then she left. Jex lay trembling, teeth clenched in agony. Rill sobbed. The others stared at me, waiting for a decision. I could have abandoned them. I could have fled deeper into the ducts, become feral, disappeared into corridors where sunlight and language never penetrated. Instead, I bound Jex's wound and carried him on my back to a safer shelter. He shook with fever. I gave him water drop by drop from a condensation catch. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You can't fight them." "No," I said. "But I can choose who they don't take." He opened his eyes and stared at me, eyes reflecting ember glow from a burning trash pile. "You're becoming like them." I didn't answer, because he was right. The next morning, I hunted not children, but syndicate scouts. I dragged their bodies into exhaust tunnels where heat stripped them to bone. I sent survivors back with a message: "I do not work for you. Come take me." They did, and they brought more guns. The battle that followed was not victory, it was attrition. We fought in silence, bare hands against shock mauls, rusted blades against monofilament whips. Children died around me, blood mixing with coolant on metal floors. I killed without hesitation, not for dominance, but for preservation. When the last syndicate enforcer fell, I stood shaking, coat soaked in blood that wasn't mine. Rill approached me, voice hollow. "What now?" I stared at the carnage, the bodies, the silence. Then I realized the truth. Every victory demanded a cost we couldn't afford. We survived the syndicate that night, but the gangs multiplied like infection. Other factions saw us as threat and opportunity. The Skinners dissolved under pressure, scattered, captured, absorbed. Some joined the Iron Fangs, others became offerings to corrupted machine spirits. Jex limped off one night and never returned. Whether he died or escaped, I will never know. I wandered alone again, stronger, colder, less human. but something of childhood still clung to me, not innocence, not hope, just the memory of wanting to have something worth protecting. That memory would eventually lead me upward, toward a world no one in the underhive deserved to see. But before ascent, one truth solidified in me like scar tissue. You are not killed in the underhive for being weak. You are killed for being noticeable, and I had become very noticeable. The hive was beginning to reshape me, and soon it would call me to climb. The weeks after the Syndicate massacre passed like blurred machinery, the kind that grinds forward whether you climb aboard or fall beneath it. I moved alone through the ducts and abandoned transit lines, scavenging less for survival and more because motion felt safer than stillness. Stillness meant memory, and memory in the underhive is a wound you reopen just by breathing. The Skinners had dissolved, consumed by larger factions, or swallowed by the tunnels where children become part of the pipework. Without a group tethering me to territory, I became ghost rather than target. I slept high above walkways where only vermin skittered, wrapped in torn insulation that crackled with static. Nights echoed with distant firefights, screams, the grinding whir of servitor engines, and sometimes a deeper resonance, like chanting from worlds beneath metal and earth. Voices prayed to things that were neither machine nor divine. Even then, I felt the hive watching me. Not the gangs, not the syndicate, the structure itself. Every vent pressurized at the exact second of my passing, as if exhaling. Every lumen strip flickered when I stopped moving, dimming until I resumed walking. The hive was not alive, just old. So old that every screw and bolt had recorded generations of suffering. Sometimes I pressed my ear against pipes just to hear the echoes of footsteps from other levels. Whole lives lived on metal floors parallel to mine, close enough to touch yet separated by stratified fate. It was during one of these nights that I witnessed the Arbite's purge. The first sign was silence, unnatural, suffocating, as though the hive itself held its breath. Then the lights surged to life, bathing corridors in pale white. People froze. Even gang members stepped backward into shadows. Then came the metallic thunder of armored boots marching in formation. The Arbites did not sneak, stalk, or ambush. They entered like inevitability. Dozens of them descended through a breach in the ceiling, grav chutes flaring as they landed in perfect unison. They moved like statues carved from lore itself, armor reinforced with plasteel plates engraved with the Imperial Aquila. Their visors were black mirrors, reflecting only the fear of those who saw themselves in them. They carried shock mauls, suppression shields, combat shotguns that fired not pellets but compliance in the form of pain. They spoke a single phrase through external vox amplifiers. By decree of the Lex Imperialis, this zone is under purgation. People ran. Not in formation, not bravely like insects scattering under a cleansing flame. The Arbites opened fire, not with intent to kill, but to neutralize every limb capable of resistance. Bodies dropped, screaming, limbs broken, skulls cracked. The gangs retaliated, firing autoguns and throwing pipe bombs, but the Arbites advanced without breaking formation. Their shields absorbed shrapnel, their armor swallowed bullets. The air filled with burning hair, gunpowder, and the reek of scorched flesh. I hid behind the corpse of a broken servitor. Its flesh was long rotted, leaving exposed circuitry caked with grime. I covered my face in its blood to mask my heat signature from Auspex scanners. The Arbites weren't hunting gangs, they were hunting faith. A heretic cult had taken root in this sector, worshippers of a rogue tech priest who promised salvation through ascension by machinery. They wore robes stitched from cable sheaths and spliced implants into their children. They didn't want power, they wanted transcendence. They saw the flesh as flawed architecture and the machine as divine redirection. In a different world, they might have become priests of the Omnissiah. In this world, they were traitors. The Arbites cornered the cult in a collapsed mag rail station. Their acolytes encircled a humming machine built from welded scrap, its core pulsing with stolen reactor cells. They chanted, voices laced with desperation. The corridors shook with a rising pulse that sounded like a heartbeat. Then the Arbites breached. A blinding flash, explosive entry charges, bodies hurled like rag dolls. The cult leader stood at the center, robes torn, bionics exposed, face replaced with a polished steel mask lit by internal circuitry. He raised his hands, not to surrender, but to complete a circuit. The machine activated, blue-white energy erupted, arcing across bodies and metal. For a moment, everyone, including the Arbites, froze in suspended motion. The machine didn't kill, it converted. Bodies flickered like holograms, flesh dissolving into radiant circuitry. Some screamed as their nerves rewove into cable strands. Some begged for death, some sang. The Arbites reacted instantly. A judge ordered heavy weapons deployed. Plasma incinerated the machine in a burst of molten slag. Those half-transformed collapsed, twitching, skin melting over exposed metal. The tech priest staggered forward, reaching toward the dying machine. I watched him fall, whispering without lungs. We were so close. The Arbites shot him again, and again, and again, not until he stopped twitching. The purge continued, long after the cult was dead. Anyone wearing robes, tattoos, or implants was executed. Wounded bystanders were shot to prevent contamination. Children found crying beside crushed bodies were dragged away in chains, not killed, but taken. The Arbites don't kill useful property. They repurpose it. I followed the transport convoy from a distance, silent among collapsed ducts. They escorted survivors, children, teenagers, anyone young enough to be profitable to a processing hub, 2 sectors up. The building had once been an administratum archive, now converted into a conscription center. Banners bearing the Imperial Aquila hung from rusted rafters. Servo skulls drifted overhead, recording everything, their lenses cold and unblinking. Children were lined up for evaluation. Medicae officials examined their teeth, their bones, their blood. Those deemed strong were branded with numeric identifiers and handed ration packets. They would join manufactura crews or be shipped to Astra Militarum regiments to replace bodies lost on distant battlefields. Those deemed weak were sent to the purification pit. No one pretended the pit was metaphor. A grated platform hung over a furnace vent glowing with geothermal flame. Workers dragged the rejected children forward, screaming, pleading, sometimes silent in shock, and pushed them into the fire. Their bodies ignited instantly. The air filled with the stench of burnt marrow. Priests stood beside the pit chanting hymns of absolution, claiming the children's souls returned to the Emperor purified of mutation and impurity. I watched from the rafters, hands shaking so violently I dug nails into skin to stop myself from leaping down. Not to save them, I had no strength for such fantasy, but to drown the priests in the flames they offered to others. One child, a girl no older than 7, looked up as she was dragged toward the edge. Her eyes met mine. She didn't beg, didn't cry. She just shook her head, a small, broken gesture that meant nothing and everything. I turned away. The scream came a second later. The Arbites left as they arrived, efficient, emotionless, unmarked by the tragedy they enforced. When the final transport lifted away, the processing center emptied, workers sweeping ash into containers labeled biohazard. I remained in the rafters, watching embers fade to black. For the first time, I understood the Imperium at scale. It did not nurture, it refined. It took raw human life and shaped it into fuel soldiers, servitors, martyrs, corpses. It did not care who you were, only whether you burned bright enough to justify consumption. The next morning, I approached the brand line, not to be selected, to see if they would take me. A clerk scanned me with an Auspex wand, voice bored, age estimate, adolescent, bone density, suitable, scar tissue normal, no mutation detected, fitness grade, acceptable. He stamped my arm with a data sigil that pulsed faintly. Report to Gate 6 for transport assignment. I should have felt triumph. For the first time, someone had recognized I existed not as threat, not as prey, but as asset. Instead, I felt dread. Not fear of death, fear of purpose. Gate 6 was guarded by troopers in flak armor bearing the sigil of the Astra Militarum. They stood in disciplined formation, rifles shouldered, helms polished. Their faces were clean, their posture unbroken. They looked like something beyond human, like symbols carved from discipline alone. Behind them, transport carriers hummed, engines warmed for launch. A commissar disembarked from one transport, coat fluttering beneath forced air. His eyes swept the line of recruits like a butcher inspecting livestock. He nodded once, satisfied, then addressed the crowd. "You belong to the Imperium now. Your lives serve a gay, singular purpose. Die where you are ordered, and die well." His voice was iron. Children stood straighter. Some believed him, some needed to. I did not break formation, I did not retreat, but I did not step forward either. I watched the transports fill with faces too young to carry rifles, too desperate to refuse destiny. I watched the commissar meet my eyes. There was no judgment there, only recognition. He had been a child once too. The ramp closed, engines ignited. The sky, what little could be seen through smoke, flared orange as the transports lifted away. Those aboard were already ghosts of wars not yet fought. I remained on the platform long after the transport noise faded, not because I lacked courage, because I understood the truth. Leaving the underhive was not escape, it was conscription by another name. Down here, death took you quickly. Up there, death expected you to justify itself. That night, I returned to the lower levels, slipping through ducts like a forgotten whisper. The Vox unit that once transmitted sermons flickered again, static, crackling into fragments of ecclesiastical speech. Service, duty, sacrifice is salvation. The words no longer felt like hope, they felt like chains. I lay beside the machine, eyes open to darkness, breath slow, listening to the hum of pipes living their own tired lives. I did not cry, I did not shiver, I simply existed. The Imperium did not save children like me. It saved only what we could become: weapons, servants, fuel. And that knowledge did not fill me with despair. It filled me with direction. One day, I would leave the underhive, but not because they chose me, because I would choose how I was used. Purpose is not given, purpose is seized, even by those the galaxy never intended to matter. The journey upward did not begin with resolve or destiny. It began because the air in the lower vaults grew too foul to breathe. Corpse fires burned constantly now, smoke curling through vents like a slow poison. Gangs fought over filtration masks scavenged from dead manufactorum workers. Tech cults siphoned oxygen lines to resurrect broken machines, leaving whole corridors collapsed under suffocation. For months, I ignored the signs, convinced that hardship was simply the price of survival. But one night, while scavenging near an old sump processing turbine, I found a girl no older than 5 lying on the grated floor, lips cracked, lungs gasping like a fish pulled from water. She clutched a rag doll sewn from cable sheaths. I pressed my ear to her chest and heard nothing but shallow wheezing. The air here had become too thin for the small, the weak, the unaugmented. The underhive was devouring itself. I carried her to a higher level, climbing rusted ladders slick with grease and mildew. She weighed almost nothing. Her fingers clung to my arm instinctively, even unconscious. I didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, didn't know if she would live through the night. I just knew she had been left to die, because the weak are burdens. Upward became necessity. The climb changed everything. Each level offered new horrors. The first ascent brought us through fungal gardens tended by robed figures with eyes covered by cloth stained purple from spore irritation. They hissed when they saw us, spreading irrigation tools like weapons. Their crops swayed in bioluminescent hues, spores drifting like sickly snow. They offered no food, no aid, only warnings. Higher levels purged the unregistered. Go back. We didn't listen. The girl needed air. I needed direction. The next level housed fuel refineries, endless rivers of oily runoff flowing into boiling vats. The heat was suffocating, walls sweating condensation that reeked of promethium. Workers here were half-burned wretches with scarred skin and filter masks fused to their faces. They crawled through pipelines on hands, stripped to bone, maintaining machinery that had not been shut down since the founding of the hive. They never spoke. Their bodies trembled with chemical exhaustion. Some had become more scar tissue than flesh. They did not look at us, not because they feared strangers, but because their world had narrowed to inches of pipe and the endless roar of pressure valves. We slept on a catwalk suspended above molten waste. The child curled against me, breath finally steady. I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt dread. I had carried her away from death, only to deliver her to a different version of it. In the underhive, mercy is rarely a path. It's a delay. At dawn, alarms shrieked across the level, lights flaring crimson. A voice thundered from speakers, mechanical and cold. Unauthorized migration detected. Deploy containment teams. Workers scattered into ducts like insects fleeing a light. Heavy footsteps echoed through distant corridors, metallic and synchronized. These weren't gangs, not scavengers, not cultists. These were sanctioned forces, enforcers of movement law. The girl's eyes widened with fear. I lifted her and ran. As we fled, gas canisters burst along walkways, releasing clouds that burned eyes and lungs. I tore cloth from my coat and wrapped it around her face. My own vision blurred. I stumbled through corridors where bodies lay twitching, limbs rigid, mouths foaming. Figures in black armor marched in formation, shock moles raised, visors glowing amber. They bore the insignia of the Lex Imperialis enforcers, not as elite as Arbites, but far more common. They weren't here to kill. They were here to redirect bodies back to productive roles. A baton cracked against my shoulder. Pain flared. I nearly dropped the girl. Hands reached for her, armored gauntlets covered in administrative purity seals. I kicked a knee. Joint, felt metal buckle, seized a gas canister, and smashed it into a helmet. The enforcer fell. I dragged the girl behind a coolant tank as shots rang out, bolts of electrified energy sparking across steel. I crawled into a maintenance shaft, barely large enough to pull her through. The shaft sealed behind us, pressure clamps locking like iron jaws. We lay in darkness, chest to chest, breathing hard. The girl whispered, voice hoarse, "Why did they want me?" I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because the truth would break her. They wanted her for the same reason anyone wanted anything in the hive: utility. She slept. I stayed awake, counting slow breaths until the gas cleared. When we emerged, the refinery had returned to normal. Workers moved like ghosts. The enforcers were gone. Bodies had been removed, floors scrubbed, ducts sealed, as though nothing had happened. That silence settled into me like a seed. If death could be erased so easily, then life meant nothing unless it carved itself into the world. We continued upward. The next sector was different: wider halls, cleaner metal, lumens functioning without flicker, posters in high Gothic plastered walls, though mold had eaten their edges. They showed smiling workers wearing fresh uniforms, holding wrenches, standing beneath banners that proclaimed, "Productivity is faith," propaganda for citizens who had never lived in filth. Civilians walked here, actual citizens, not feral scavengers. They wore issued boots, clean coats, standardized IDs. They carried ration cards. Their skin was unscarred. Their children laughed without flinching at shadows. The girl clutched my hand tighter, shrinking behind me when a group passed. Their eyes lingered on us, filled not with fear, but disgust, as though we were pests, not people. One woman whispered to her companion, "Underhive trash, disease carriers." I could have killed her before she finished the sentence. Instead, I kept walking. Violence here would not liberate us. It would exile us back to places we had already survived once. Security checkpoints lined corridors guarded by men in polished armor bearing heraldry of the planetary governor. They scanned IDs, voices stern but not cruel. I watched citizens swipe cards, pass through gates, continue with their lives. When we approached, a guard stepped forward, blocking our path. "Papers." The word meant nothing to me. He repeated, slower, as if addressing a defective servitor. "Identification, citizenship registration, work assignment, clearance level." I shook my head. His expression hardened. He tapped a rune on his chest plate. More guards approached. Their hands rested on weapons. They didn't shout or threaten. They didn't need to. They had authority. I had only existence. I raised my hands slowly. "We seek passage, nothing more." "You seek what you have no right to," the guard replied. The girl trembled behind me. She coughed, lungs still, raw. The guard's gaze shifted to her, irritation twisting into discomfort. "She is ill," he muttered. "If we allow her into upper sectors, contagion risk. She will die if we stay here," I said. "Then she dies." That was the moment I understood that cruelty in the upper hive was not loud or chaotic like the gangs. It was quiet, administrative, reinforced by laws thicker than armor. The violence here did not look like bloodshed. It looked like denial. I tensed, ready to fight, but the girl tugged my coat. She pointed to a side hall I hadn't noticed, narrow, unguarded, lined with maintenance doors marked with faded sigils. I nodded subtly. When the guard reached for my arm to escort us away, I stepped backward and spoke calmly. "We're leaving." He didn't stop us. He didn't care enough to. We slipped into the maintenance corridor and moved until the noise of civilization faded behind us. The air grew colder. The lights dimmed. Pipes hummed like distant voices. This level was neither underhive nor sanctioned infrastructure. It was forgotten space places built for workers who no longer lived, routes maintained by protocols no one remembered. There, I met the archivist. I thought at first he was another corpse slumped against a conduit manifold, but when I approached, he lifted his head. His robes were once administratum white, now yellowed and brittle. His skin was parchment, stretched across bone. His eyes were replaced with augmetic lenses flickering with internal data streams. Dozens of data slates lay scattered around him, pages etched with records, population quotas, resource tallies, disciplinary logs. He studied me, then the girl, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "You carry her upward without clearance. Why? To keep her alive. Life is not reason," he murmured. "Life is cost." He gestured to a nearby slate. It displayed numbers shifting, counting, recalculating. Losses, births, worker quotas, death quotas. He traced a line on the screen. "If she lives, someone else must die to equalize burden. Law of biomass distribution." "You mean to say letting her burn in that furnace was order?" He nodded. "Order is survival. Chaos is sentiment." I clenched my teeth. "And what are you?" "A curator of forgotten truths," he whispered. "I record because no one else remembers." The girl hid behind my arm. The archivist tilted his head, lenses focusing. "You climb without directive, without invitation, without designation. That is why you frighten them." "I don't frighten them," I said. "I offend them." He smiled, brittle as cracked bone. "Offense is fear in uniform." He handed me a data slate, ancient and locked, beneath encryption. "Take this. It contains passage routes to higher levels used by citizens during famine cycles. Not safe, but less watched." I hesitated. "Why help us?" "Because records are meaningless if no one survives to become them." He closed his eyes, exhaled once, and did not move again. Whether he died in that moment or simply returned to a form of sleep, I do not know. I did not check. Some truths are better left unmeasured. We followed the routes. They led to industrial elevators sealed behind coglock mechanisms. I pried open access panels, rewired power flow, and bypassed ID locks using a stripped cable fused to the slate like a key. The elevator doors shuddered and peeled back, revealing a lift large enough to transport cargo containers. We stepped inside. The ascent felt unreal. The platform trembled, chains groaning, walls blurring past as we rose through layers of society like ghosts abandoning graves. The girl pressed her forehead to the viewer port, watching metal turn into marble, soot into sterile white. She whispered, voice trembling with something I barely recognized. "It's beautiful." To her, it was. To me, it was a battlefield wearing perfume. The elevator stopped beneath. What I knew instinctively was a different world. Hallways gleamed with polished steel. Fluorescent lights hummed in perfect rhythm. People walked with measured purpose, dressed in uniforms that indicated profession rather than desperation. They did not look around as though expecting violence. Their boots clicked instead of shuffled. Their breaths came easy. We stepped out. No alarms blared. No guns rose. No one looked at us. We had crossed a threshold invisible yet absolute, not a border of stone, but a border of assumption. We didn't belong here, but belonging was a matter of perception, not fact. If we walked with purpose, we might remain unnoticed long enough to find sanctuary. But sanctuary is a myth in the Imperium. As we moved deeper into the level, we reached a massive observation deck. Windows, actual transparent glass, not rusted viewing slits, revealed the sprawl of the hive stretching outward like metal mountains. Thousands of levels stacked like geological strata. Plumes of smoke billowed from manufactoria stacks. Traffic lanes carved luminous arteries through smog. At the far horizon, a faint line of gold glimmered upper spires reaching toward light stolen from the sky. The girl laughed, awestruck. "We made it." I wished she was right. A voice echoed behind us, calm, composed, but unmistakably authoritative. "No one makes it here by accident." We turned. A man in Navy uniform stood framed by light. His coat bore the insignia of the Planetary Defense Command. His gaze wasn't cruel, merely observant, as though cataloguing our existence. He looked at the girl, then at me. He did not draw a weapon. He did not shout for guards. He simply asked, "Where are you from?" I opened my mouth, but words caught in my throat. I thought of the pits, the gangs, the slaughter, the girl's scream swallowed by furnace flame. I thought of all the lives erased before they ever had the chance to speak. I thought of the archivist, of the enforcers, of the commissar, of every hand that pushed us downward because upward was reserved for those born to ceilings instead of floors. The truth formed, raw and unpolished. "We're from below," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then you understand what that means." He stepped aside, gesturing toward a corridor that led deeper, not into confinement, but into possibility. He did not grant permission. He acknowledged existence, and that, more than any gate or weapon, was the moment we truly crossed upward, not because we were allowed, but because we refused to vanish. The man in the command coat did not arrest us, interrogate us, or order us return to the lower levels. Instead, he walked beside us in silence, a quiet escort through corridors lined with banners depicting imperial victories I had never known existed. Statues of heroes stood upon marble plinths, their armor polished, their stern visages frozen in eternal resolve. Their names were engraved in high Gothic: generals, saints, martyrs. People who had bled for the Imperium, or perhaps been bled by it. The distinction blurred the longer I stared at their faces. The girl walked close to my side, one hand gripping my coat, the other brushing the smooth walls as if to prove they were real. Her eyes reflected fountains of sterile light. She looked weightless here, as though gravity itself finally released its grip. We soon reached a transit node unlike any I had seen. Clean platforms, security stations staffed by polite personnel, transport rails gliding silently beneath reinforced glass. Man motioned to an empty bench, near a luminescent shrine adorned with carved reliefs depicting the Emperor upon the golden throne. I sat. The girl leaned her head against my arm and closed her eyes. The man stood a few paces away, neither looming nor relaxed, merely waiting for me to speak. After several minutes, he removed one glove and ran his hand across the back of his neck, revealing a thin metal port fused into his spine, an interface for command-grade Vox units. Not a decoration, a necessity. He looked older, up close, not in age, but in wear. Lines around his eyes formed by decisions, not years. "You came from the lower levels, but you do not move like one born there," he said quietly. There was no accusation, only observation. "You move like someone who learned to survive by reading others before they read you." I answered with honesty that surprised even me. "I don't know how to move any other way." He nodded as though this confirmed a suspicion. "This child, she is not yours. She is alive because I carried her," I replied. "If that makes her mine, then yes." He regarded us with a long, slow breath. "You understand something most adults here never learn. The Imperium is not built on ideology or loyalty. It is built on obligation." He sat beside me, voice dropping to a tone meant only for those marked by struggle. "Every soul is accounted for, every ration measured, every worker tracked, every death justified. The Imperium does not hate you. It simply has no space for what cannot be classified." I stared at the transit rails drifting beneath glass like veins filled with light. "Then classify me." His lips curved into what might have been a sad smile. "Classification requires purpose." The girl stirred, mumbling nonsense, caught between exhaustion and dreams. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. His voice softened. "You climbed from a world that should have killed you. That alone means something. Meaning doesn't feed anyone. I said. Meaning doesn't save anyone. No, he replied, but meaning gives permission to endure. Before I could respond, a squad of officers approached. Their uniforms bore the sigil of the planetary command staff. They stopped several meters away, awaiting silent instruction. The man stood and addressed them without looking back. They are under my protection. No one questioned him. They bowed heads and dispersed as quietly as they came. He turned to me again. I can secure work assignments, housing permits, identity slates, but everything given is monitored, every step traced. Once you enter the machine of the Imperium as citizen, you belong to it, forever. Belonging, a word heavier than chains. I looked at the girl. She deserved safety. Air that did not choke, water that did not carry rot, sleep without waking to screams. Yet to grant her those things meant binding her to a world designed not for salvation but obedience. What happens if we refuse? I asked. He did not hesitate. You will be hunted. Not as criminals, as anomalies. The Imperium cannot tolerate unregistered movement, not at this level. His expression turned grave. In time, the Arbites will come. I thought of the purge, the children dragged to the pit, the machine that transformed bodies into circuitry. I thought of the gangs below, their rage forged in starvation and abandonment. Every path led to violence. Survival was not freedom. It was merely the privilege of choosing the manner of inevitability. The man spoke again, voice distant. There is one alternative. Fewer choose it, fewer survive it. Speak clearly, I said. He met my eyes without flinching. You could join the Astra Militarum. The girl could be placed in a Schola Progenium system. She would be fed, educated, protected. She would become something dangerous, eventually. A weapon, perhaps. A servant of the Emperor's war machine. No, one would touch her again, but her life would not be her own. A Schola child, raised in discipline, faith, and service. I imagined her clad in carapace armor one day, bolt gun in hands too small now to lift one, or trained to chant litanies of purity, or molded by drill abbots into a soldier who forgot the underhive entirely. Better than death, worse than choice. And me? I asked. You would fight where they send you, not a threat, a promise. He placed a data slate beside me. If you choose this path, board the next transport through Gate 7. Say nothing, simply present the slate. He turned to leave. I called out, why give us a choice at all? He paused, hands clasped behind his back. Because once, I was the one brought up instead of left to burn. He walked away without waiting for my reply. The girl opened her eyes slowly. Are we safe now? I brushed hair from her forehead. For the moment. Her gaze fell to the slate. She traced its edge with woad. A fingertip. What is that? A decision, I whispered. We stayed on the bench until the lumens dimmed to night cycle levels. Officers walked past, oblivious to us. The glass windows overlooked the endless sprawl below. Somewhere, the gangs were killing. The enforcers were purging. The manufactoria were grinding bones to paste. Somewhere, children screamed into smoke. She leaned against me and asked, voice fragile, do you think we'll ever see the sky? I closed my eyes. I had heard of the sky air that was not recycled, clouds that were not smoke, stars that were not ash. A realm above spires where nobles walked beneath daylight. It felt mythical, something told in stories rather than geography. If we climb high enough, I said. She exhaled softly and fell asleep again. I sat unmoving, watching transports arrive and depart. Officers boarded, servitors loaded cargo. Vox announcements echoed in sterilized monotony. Every motion was controlled, the choice fractured, inside me. Stay unregistered and be hunted. Become a citizen and be owned. Serve the guard and be spent. Send the girl to the Schola and doom her to a life shaped by war. Every path belonged to the Imperium. Only one thing did not: memory. I lifted the slate. Its surface glowed with encoded text. Gate 7's runes pulsed faintly across the platform. I stood and carried the girl. She never stirred and walked with controlled purpose, neither fearful nor bold, just another soul moving along a prescribed path. The gate scanned us. Runes flashed green. The guard did not question me. The transport bay beyond hummed with activity. Stormtrooper instructors barked orders. Priests whispered blessings. New recruits stood numb with shock. A scholar handler approached, robes lined with purity seals, eyes sharp behind spectacles. She looked at the girl, then at me. "Is this the child?" I nodded once. "What is her designation?" "She has no designation." The handler tapped her. Data slate, creating one. Numbers replaced identity. Letters replaced childhood. She reached to take the girl from my arms. The girl tightened her grip. Her voice cracked. "Don't leave me." My body stopped moving. The handler frowned. "You must release her. Attachment hinders indoctrination," I whispered. "I'll find you again." She shook her head violently. "Promise." In that moment, I understood the lie of salvation. Rescuing someone does not end suffering. It simply changes its shape. But breaking truth in her presence would stain me deeper than the hive ever could. I leaned close, pressing my forehead to hers. "I promise." Her arms fell away, not loosening, but accepting. The handler lifted her gently and carried her down a corridor filled with children dressed in identical gray uniforms. She did not cry. She did not look back. Neither did I. As they vanished into the regimented march of new lives, I boarded a different ramp. Soldiers lined up beneath, banners bearing the Aquila. Their faces were unreadable, some proud, some resigned, some hollow. A commissar paced before them, reciting oaths of loyalty. I walked among them, and no one questioned my presence. I was another body, another rifle, another sacrifice measured in logistics rather than names. When the transport hatch sealed, engines roaring beneath hardened plating, I placed a hand on the cold metal wall. Through it, I felt the hum of a world rising into motion, machinery grinding to life, destiny taking form. The hive had shaped me. Now, I would shape what I could of the war. The girl would grow far from me, molded by doctrine, shielded by regiments, walking corridors where memory of darkness would fade into myth. Perhaps one day she would forget my face. Perhaps she would hate it. Perhaps she would survive longer than I ever could. But the promise remained. I would find her again. Not because the Imperium permitted it, but because the underhive breeds two things in equal measure: hunger and resolve. The transport engines ignited. We lifted into a future written in gunfire. I did not pray. I did not mourn. I simply breathed air that for the first time did not taste like rust. The hive did not let me escape. It forged me, and I would return to it not as prey, not as orphan, not as forgotten dust, but as something the galaxy would be forced to acknowledge.